Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining our conversation today, which will focus on the crucial topic of the EU policies on biofuels, specifically on the role of biofuels in speeding up the much discussed transition to a low carbon economy and at the same time supporting Europe's farmers. We have the pleasure to have with us today people, distinguished speakers, people who know very well this case, and I hope that with their input through our conversation, we will be able to take the discussion a step further. Particularly, we have here with us today Mr. Luke Pelkmans, Technical Coordinator at the International Energy Agency, Bioenergy, Mr. Patrick Pagani, Deputy Secretary General of Copa-Cogeca, Joao Pacheco, Senior Fellow at the think tank Farm Europe, and last but not least, Ms. Valérie Corre, Director Regulatory Affairs, Alcohol, Ethanol EU at Tereos, as well as board member of ePURE. So, just a few weeks before the European elections, the debate over what is coming up next, especially on EU green policies, has already heated up. Decarbonizing the European transport has, as we all know, has always been a hot topic in Brussels. Many policies have been implemented in the past. Still, some suggest, some estimate, some believe that the perfect solution has not been found yet. Investments in electric cars and in advanced biofuels have not scaled up yet, while Europe has decided, a big part of policymakers basically questions the first generation biofuels. I'll go straight to Mr. Pelkmans, and I will ask, we see on a global level, we see the production of first generation biofuels such as ethanol is basically skyrocketing in many big countries, India, Brazil, the US. Europe has decided to follow a different path. Why is this happening according to you? Does Europe see something that others don't?
It's a difficult question to answer, but indeed you're right. Other regions in the world have joined forces in what they call the Global Biofuel Alliance, where they stress the strategic importance of biofuels. Many of these regions also have quite a lot of domestic feedstocks to support that. So I give the example of Brazil, where they have a lot of sugarcane production. United States has a big farm production in terms of corn and soy. And in India, they also see a lot of opportunities internally in using their own feedstocks and also reducing their reliance on imported fossil fuels. Now, Europe has gone a certain way. So I think we've had biofuels on the agenda for about 20 years at the moment. That's when all the policies started. We've had some ups and downs, I think, in policies also with things identified like indirect land use change, which has put in a lot of discussion, the food versus fuel discussion emerged in 2008. At the end, I think in practice, there's no real conflict, but it's still in people's minds. So I think there's a lot of sentiment behind it also in the policy making, but still we have to realize that biofuels and renewable fuels are one of the very important options for decarbonization in transport, or defossilization in transport. And I do have the feeling that the expectations of electrification are a little bit overrated as what is actually happening in the market. So it is very important to invest in electrification, in moving the fleet to more electricity. But there is still sales of cars with internal combustion engines which last for the next 10-15 years. There's the existing fleet is still there, and you also have sectors like the heavy duty sector which will rely on fuels for decades, the coming decades. So, and moreover in the future, the longer term future, you also have to look at maritime and aviation. So I think in some way they have to take a step back and realize, well, we have to do things in a complementary way. So looking at what are the things that you can do and should do to move away from fossil fuels in transport. And all of them are important. So you can't just cherry pick on saying, well, this is the one that we hope is going to make it. There's the different options: electrification, renewable fuels, and also reducing energy demand and having better energy efficiency. They all need to come together and are complementary solutions. I hope it answers your questions a little bit, but
yes, I still don't understand what the rest of the world sees and Europe doesn't see. Because, you know, if the entire globe invests in biofuels to decarbonize, you know, transport, for instance, road transport in this case, and Europe doesn't do it. At the same time, you just admitted that the electrification of road transport is going to be delayed. But at the same time, Europe is phasing out biofuels. Who's going to cover the gap created by the biofuels, for instance?
yeah, that's what I mean with take a step back and see what you really expect and how you're going to solve the issue, and having realistic expectations also from different solutions. That's certainly what needs to be done at European level. And as mentioned, the countries that you mentioned, which are increasing their biofuels, are the ones which are relying on their own feedstock usually, which is quite important. And it's also a matter of energy security. And the energy security part is of course, has gotten much more important also now with the Russian invasion in Ukraine. So that's also something which we have to put high on the agenda.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Pelkmans. We will have the chance to dig deeper during our conversation. Let me go now to Mr. Pagani, who represents the farmers' organizations and cooperatives. How has the situation of EU policy making on biofuels, how has this affected your farming sector all these years? I would like you to give us an overview of what has happened, briefly of what has happened in the last 20 years. And secondly, how important can nowadays, the first generation biofuels are for the European farmers?
Good afternoon to all, and thanks for the invitation. I think it's important, as you mentioned, but also as Luke was saying, to put the discussion in the context of the objectives that the Commission and the EU has. So we have an overall objective 2050 zero emissions, but also a reduction of emissions by 55% by 2030 compared to 1990 levels. And so agriculture and forestry sector are partner in these objectives, clearly, and there is a commitment to reach climate neutrality, reducing our emissions, producing biofuels, bioenergy and bio-based materials, and also by increasing and maintaining carbon sink, so somehow also replacing fossil fuels. So this is key. So over the years, the contribution of agriculture in relation to the biofuels has been key. And policy, one main message I would like to convey is the need of stability. So policies that change overall create stability. Agriculture has a strong link with the biofuels sector. On one side, basically creating important protein byproducts that they offset the need to import such commodities. And on the other side, clearly they offer an additional revenue to farmers. So they also secure an increase in European food production, contributing to all the goals. So from our side, production of biofuels coming from agriculture and crops goes hand in hand with production of energy. And as was mentioned before, is key to substitute the fossil fuels, but also to reduce dependency from other sources of energy. At the end, one of the main elements that the EU agricultural land used for biofuels is less than 3% of total EU cropland. So the amount is minimal. But on the other side, the value for farmers is key. Looking to transport, it's key to have no technology should be excluded from the toolbox to decarbonize the transport. And it must be mentioned in a context where transport represents in the EU 1/4 of the EU emissions. So I think this is the full picture that needs to be considered in this discussion.
Yeah, but You said that the biofuel production for farmers is another market, super crucial. You also mentioned indirectly the inconsistency when it comes to EU policy making on biofuels. How this inconsistency affected the profits, the pockets essentially of EU farmers? I mean, of your organizations. I mean, what is the feedback you get from them?
As I said before, I think there is a need to have stability. So now there is a 7% crop-based cap. There was strong discussion. We were asking actually to have the possibility to increase this amount, but just a few data. So crop-based biofuels represent a market outlet for vegetable oils of 2/3 of rapeseed oil, cereals 11 million tons, and sugar beet 1.8 million tons equivalent sugar. So one side, they are definitely an important part of the outlet. And on the other side, I would also stress the issue of protein-rich byproduct consumption, which remains key in this respect. So by producing these products, these co-products, reduce the need of import. So we need to find, and looking forward to the transport, again, on one side, there is a need to reduce the energy dependency, but on the other side, and to reduce the emissions, particularly from transport, and on the other side, we put limits from decarbonizers to transport, looking, for example, to electrification. So this is the typical currents that create also instability for the future. So we know that for the future, there is this changing of regulation. There are needed investments. So where do we find the right balance? And again, we need to look for looking for the policy, particularly from the next commission, I would say.
Yeah, we will come back to this topic, because the political balances in the next European Commission, and particularly in the next European Parliament, I guess will play a role in the discussion. Let me go now to Mr. Pacheco from Farm Europe. We know each other for years, and I know that you have in the past you strongly criticized the European Commission for its handling over biofuels. Did you see any change in the last 5 years? And what are your expectations about the next 5 years after the 9th of June?
Well, thank you for having me, Sarantis. I must confess, I haven't seen much of a change in the European Commission. I have seen the same bias against biofuels, in particular crop-based biofuels, and that hasn't changed. The Commission has very clearly stated at different levels, different moments, that the future was not on crop-based biofuels, but on advanced biofuels. And the Commission did not recognize the fact that both are intertwined. You need both, and big operations cannot be made without having one and the other. Now, you asked me what the expectations are. I must say that we have achieved a certain stability in terms of the regulation. RED 3, as compared to the predecessor, RED 2, keeps fundamentally the same parameters for crop-based biofuels, the cap that was referred to before. But that was achieved because of a push from the European Parliament, not from an initiative, I would say, from the European Commission itself. So my expectations for the next 5 years is that there will be more of a recognition of the need for biofuels to decarbonize transport. Look, Sarantis, when you see the current situation where it is self-evident that the targets cannot be achieved without biofuels, where there is a rush to get biofuels for aviation, where there is a concern that all the targets that are in place will increase the cost of fuels for the economy in general and for private citizens in particular. I think that will have a bearing on a revaluation of the situation. But I'm an optimist by nature, so I leave it there.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Joao. I mean, but still, I will focus on what you mentioned, that the main push for a change, for a slight change, came from the European Parliament. So we all see the projections, we all see the estimations of the vote, and we also see that essentially the green parties are do not perform as they performed 5 years ago. Do you believe that this is going to change the new political balances? I mean, it's clear that there will be a right-wing turn. However, the pro-EU coalition will still remain centrist, even without the Greens. Will this affect the whole discussion about the Green Deal? And obviously, this is going to have a spillover effect on other parts, such as, transport decarbonization, biofuels. Do you believe that the non-participation of the Greens in this pro-EU coalition could affect the discussion on biofuels? An estimation, not...
I think it could. I think it could, Sarantis. And I would add one element. I think there is a crucial element, which is the future of the internal combustion engine. And as you know, there is already a discussion whether or not there should be an end to the ICE in 2035, if I'm not mistaken. And the revision that is embedded in the regulation for 2026 is something that, for now, the major political group has said they want to revise. They want to have a fresh view on that. And other than banning one particular form of technology, they would prefer to focus on the neutrality of the fuels used. And I would add to have a well-to-wheel approach, not a biased approach. So, in the context of this major review, and there are major interests here, I would say that go even beyond the sector of biofuels. In this major revision to come, biofuels that are close or achieving neutrality can perform a role that is recognized, and not only recognized, indispensable to decarbonize the sector. So I see this future, I see the future of this discussion in this context.
Sorry, can you hear me now? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Now we're going to Ms. Corre from ePURE. Your industry has talked about, the inconsistency of EU policy making when it comes to biofuels. 15 years ago, 17 years ago, you were asked to invest in first generation biofuels. Some years later, they told you not to invest. So how has this policy making affected your in the industry, and what is the current state of play, essentially?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to get the chance to explain and spread the message in a way. To answer your question, it was 2003 when the Commission first started to say we have a problem. We need to decarbonize the transport sector. We are heavily relying on imported oil. We have to do something. So the diagnostic was very well done, and so they asked the investors to invest, which we did. There were billions invested by the industry back then. It was actually in 2009 precisely that we started investing billions of euros. We invested to, relish and meet the objectives that the EU wanted to achieve. Back then, it was to not only reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but also reduce our energy dependency and also support farmers, because these were the three pillars of the policy back then. The farmers aspect disappeared a bit in the picture, but it was there back in the early stage of this policy. So there was trust back then. There was trust, and we trusted it, and so we went for it. And then there was as Luc mentioned, the food versus fuel debate. And the food versus fuel debate, I have to say, looking backwards, was a legitimate discussion to have. It was a good question to ask whether or not there would be a conflict. And the problem we had was that after many studies, many reports made by the Commission and a number of consultants, which concluded that there was no such thing as food versus fuel, but rather a synergy, etc., the bad reputation, so to speak, continued. And up until now, we can be amazed in a way to see that this bad reputation of first generation has outlived the facts and the science that exists, and everyone knows it. So that's when we actually entered a zone of no trust, no more trust. There were investments, and now the conclusion is that since then there was no more investment made. In fact, there was an investment made even in advanced biofuel in Romania, and that sorry to say, but this investment had to go bankrupt. Probably, I don't know the nitty-gritties of course of everything, but probably that the lack of consistency and the lack of visibility and what have you is at the origin of this bankruptcy. So what do we see now is that as we speak, we have produced back in 2022, these are the latest figures we have, ePURE's producing members. We produced, sorry, I don't have the number again with me. It was 5.71 billion liters of ethanol, together with 5.9 million tons of food and feed co-products, including high protein feed, animal feed. But this was only 80% of the total production capacity installed in the EU. So what we observe is that we are doing much less than we could in the EU. So much less ethanol, much less feed and co-products, much less also CO2, biogenic CO2, because we also produce a valuable CO2 stemming from the production of ethanol. So this is where we are. And I would also add, who is the big loser of this lack of consistency and lack of policy? I would say, unfortunately, it's us, collectively as a society, because we have lost 21 years of time. We could have done much more. We could have decarbonized much more. We could have reduced our emissions much more. We could have reduced our imports much more than we have done, actually. So it's not just the industrial part that is, sad to realize, but it's also the social aspects and economic aspects also, and of course environmental aspects of this lack of vision. And if you see, because it's very difficult to say what have we lost, what have we missed. But if you look at what happened in Brazil and in the US, where this industry, this ethanol industry, has enjoyed, 50 years of unwavering, constant policy supportive, supporting the industry for the last 50 years. And you can see how big this industry is. You can see, you can measure, you can have a sense of how much we have missed by not having this constant policy that we are actually asking with, hopefully we will have with the next, after the next elections.
Yeah, after the next elections, though, it's highly likely that von der Leyen will be re-elected as president of the European Commission. Von der Leyen has explicitly said that the next European Commission will be centrist, will be closer to the center when it comes to policy making. According to you, does this mean that there is going to be a reality check when it comes to biofuels?
First of all, being closer to the center, what does it mean concretely speaking? You know, I'm a citizen. I'm down on earth. I'm not a politician or commenting political, you know, life in Europe.
I'm asking for your interpretation.
Yeah, but also what I'm saying is that, you know, bluntly speaking, what we need in the EU is pragmatism, science-based decision makers, and policymakers that are not influenced by dogma. So if this is falling in the category of being closer to the center, then I'm fine with it. I'm even going to vote for these people. But, you know, this is what we actually really mean. If this is what we have as next generation politician, I would say, yes, I believe that they are going to revise their stance on first generation biofuel. They are going to revise their stance on the regulation, as Joao said, about CO2 emissions for cars, because this regulation must be revised as well in 2026. So, you know, if we have pragmatic politicians in the next round, then fine, we will have a better approach, a better assessment, and honestly, they would be more keen to look at facts, to look at the reality, and to look exactly what people and citizens need. And when I say looking at facts, I mean, you know, realizing and looking at what the contribution of ethanol, bioethanol in Europe, it's more than 78% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions compared to petrol. That's facts, and this is on a well-to-wheel analysis. You know, everything is counted. That's number one. Number two, it supports food production. These are facts that we can demonstrate. You know, it's not philosophical thoughts. And then if you look at the reality is very important. If you want to achieve a target, you better have, you know, a clear understanding of the reality. And the reality is that ACA, you know, the car manufacturer association, European association, they said that in 2023, 69% of the cars sold on the EU market, well, they had actually an internal combustion engine in them. So they were either gasoline cars or hybrid or plug-in hybrids. So that's very important to bear in mind, because these cars, they are going to be on EU roads for at least 20 years. So how are we going to achieve our targets? You know, 2030, 2040, what have you, 2050 even, targets, if we don't decarbonize this fleet that we know will have an internal combustion engine back, you know, until at least 2040. So we know for sure now, it's a given fact that we need low carbon liquid biofuels like bioethanol. So
let me ask this question to Mr. Pelkmans. Will Europe be able to decarbonize, given the current circumstances, will Europe be able to decarbonize road transport without first generation biofuels? And a second question, which is related to this, you admitted before that electrification will be delayed. But how about the advanced biofuels? Will they be enough to cover the gap created by the first generation biofuels?
Okay. I think also in that sense, we need to be realistic. So I think there's certainly a big pro for advanced biofuels, because you open up the feedstock base to all kinds of residues, lignocellulose. So that's really an important aspect. You can grow energy crops on all kinds of abandoned areas and things like that. So it's one of the basic things that we need to do, and we need to do it fast and start fast, but also keep keep realistic prospects on how fast that you can build this up, because they also need to have confidence in regulations and support on the longer term. But if you look at the 10-year time frame, they won't be able to substitute for the first generation crops, if you can call it like that. So it's something that you need to do additionally. At least that is my feeling. And on the other side, I don't like the distinction between first generation, second generation. So for me, it's more about what is the greenhouse gas balance of the fuel that you produce. What impact does it have? Does it have an impact on indirect land use change, or do you avoid interaction with food production or something? I think those things are much more important than classifying crops into first generation and second generation. But I feel this advanced biofuels based on all kinds of material residues are very important in the future, but you have to be realistic on how fast you can implement those.
Yeah, this is what I wanted to insist on this, because we saw some I mean, is it true that the investments in advanced biofuels are not that advanced? I mean, they haven't scaled up. I mean, what will change from now on in order to scale up?
One of the tricky things happening in transport now is that the market has jumped on what qualified a little bit as advanced biofuels or double counted biofuels for used cooking oil. And that was kind of this cheap alternative as to be qualified as advanced, and that hasn't helped the real advanced biofuels that we would also need on the longer term with much broader feedstock range. So that's one of the dangers, that there is something cheap which is fulfilling that, and that is kind of blocking investments that we also need in the future for the real advanced technologies. But we do see initiatives popping up. Gasification is somehow coming also in the United States as advanced technology. We have advanced ethanol, although it has some setbacks at the moment, but there is still a lot of promise. But also, I would certainly make that more complementary to the crop-based ethanol. So it's technologies which closely link to each other. So and then you also have liquefaction, pyrolysis types of technologies. So these technologies are coming. But as mentioned, you need to be realistic on how fast they will be coming, and also if there's discussions on the feedstock that they will use, because we also always have to keep in mind that there's always going to be discussions in some way, and they need to have a long-term perspective. That is really important also.
Yeah. Again to Joao, a question, because I saw you smiling before when I asked the question, the reality check and the centrist approach of the potential next European Commission. I mean, you are a former EU Commission official, if I'm not mistaken. You know how the system works, how the procedures are being implemented. My question is, do you really believe that a reality check is going to... Everybody talks about, realism. Everybody talks about, the need for a reality check, what we can achieve with what means and by when. But the point is that, do you really believe that there will be a reality check that will produce tangible political and policy results when it comes to transport, to road transport, decarbonization? I mean, what is your feeling?
Well, I'm going to be absolutely blunt with you, Sarantis. I would have loved to see the reality check coming from the Commission. I'm a former Deputy Director General of DG Agri, as you recall. So I would love to see an initiative by the services, by former colleagues, to re-examine the policy with the lines that Valérie just mentioned. Facts, science, objectives, pragmatism. But I don't believe that would be the way. I believe it has to be driven by policymakers. It has to be driven by commissioners. It has to be driven by the European Parliament. It has to be driven by countries. I think, unfortunately, from what I've witnessed, and you asked me what happened in the last 5 years, from what I've witnessed, there is a sort of entrenched view, prejudice. And to overcome that, you need to have directives saying, look, we are going to go another way, look at it carefully, tell me how this can be done. So it has to come this time top down, I'm afraid.
And what would be, according to you, as an analyst, what would be the perfect legislative proposal for biofuels in order to satisfy all the needs? And at the same time, if I understand correctly, all solutions should be on board until this electrification is a feasible solution. But what would be, judging from the current legislation, what would be the perfect proposal in order to, optimize road transport decarbonization?
Right. I would start again by the internal combustion engine. I would say that the principle of fuel neutrality should be enshrined in the legislation without prejudice to any type of fuel that would achieve that goal, right? That's the first thing. And it's very important stepping stone. Then I would look at the existing legislation and I see a number of points that worry me. Let me go through very quickly. On the attempt to get advanced biofuels as the answer for the refuel aviation or for the maritime sector, we have discriminated against the so-called first generation biofuels, the crop-based biofuels. And now we have a problem because people start realizing that there are not enough legitimate advanced biofuels in the market. What you have, Sarantis, is a lot of biofuels that are on paper labeled as advanced, but they are coming from places where it is very unlikely that they are really advanced. And they are accepted on the basis of certification that is not checked by the Commission. So there are.
Are you referring to UCO? Are you referring to UCO? What are you?
Not only UCO, but also some other palm oil effluents that are used to produce also advanced, so-called advanced biofuel. We have a big problem there. It's millions of tons. So this is most probably a widespread fraud, and that has to be tackled. Now, we have to make sure that in order to decarbonize the sector, we don't discriminate between advanced and so-called non-advanced. The second thing I would say is that the current legislation puts a lower cap even than 7% on the use of crop-based biofuels because it says countries that have a very low percentage of use of crops to produce biofuels cannot increase basically, or can increase only marginally that percentage. So on the one hand, you tell countries you have to decarbonize. On the other hand, you tell, but you cannot go to the 7%. So something has to be done in that respect. And also, I would be also very concerned about something that was said before. I think it was from our colleague and friend from the Copa-Cogeca, stability. Because one thing that I have noticed is that all these fluctuations in the legislation, all this uncertainty has drawn investments by European groups outside Europe. I know, because I work with them, that investments that should have been made in Europe to produce biofuels, were made in Canada, were made in the United States, and were made in India. So we need to change things. We don't need dramatic, radical change, but we need to address these very important issues.
Yeah, now you are raising a competitiveness issue at the same time, if I understand correctly, and that's why I want to ask Valérie in this regard: can we catch up? Not only, from a legislation point of view, but at the same time on an industry level. I mean, because the competitiveness discussion is wider. It's not only about biofuels. It's related almost to every economic sector. But when it comes to transport decarbonization and biofuels, first generation biofuels, crop-based biofuels in particular, can we catch up if legislation changes in the next 5 years mandate?
Yeah, well, I'm like Joao. I'm an optimist by nature. So, when I'm deeply convinced that when there's a will, there's a way. So that's, being said, I think what we need, first of all, as I said earlier, there was a big trust issue, I would say, and you don't recoup the trust by snapping into your fingers. Investors are very sensitive creatures, and when it comes to injecting hundreds of millions of euros, they are very cautious, I would say. So how do you get back the trust? Well, it's very simple. We need a plan. And we need to forge that plan all together, including with those who have doubts and fears about the nature and the what have you. We need a plan that takes everybody's ideas on board. Because when I hear people saying, yeah, but you can't decarbonize everything with biofuels, the biomass is not enough, we are on a finite planet, blah, blah, blah. Yes, of course. Of course, this is true. We never said we should decarbonize everything with bioethanol alone, or even biodiesel or biogas, or even with electricity. As it was said, we need to have a mix. We are not going to do that either with 100% electricity. So we need to, to organize things. First of all, we need to stop consuming for nothing. We need to reduce our consumption. That's the first thing first. And then we have to define what the share of bioethanol can be, what the share of biodiesel, the biogas, the electricity, the what have you. And when we have a plan like this, we all agree on this plan, then we can organize, who is going to invest and who is going to do what. That's the way I would do it. I would simply do it this way. Otherwise, if you say tomorrow, if the Commission is putting a legislation tomorrow and say, yeah, let's go for bioethanol first generation, yeah, everybody is going to say, no, we don't trust. We don't trust it anymore. Because who says that tomorrow another politician or another party is going to say the opposite, that first generation or advanced bioethanol is not good? We should understand one thing for me, which is important. We are, in a way, a sector that is fundamentally strategic. And so in this respect, we should be not connected with politics. We don't care if the Greens, the left, the right, the center, the left center, the right center is in power, because we should be accepted as a strategic sector by every kind of party, because we are. If we look at what happened in Brazil and in the US over these last 50 years I mentioned earlier, how many political swings has there been in those countries, right, left, center, what have you, who put in jeopardy the promotion of this sector? Nobody, because it's not an issue. Why? Because they all understand the economic, social, environmental, strategic importance of this sector. You know, that's as simple as that. So that's what we need. And once we have this kind of clear framework, believe me, together with everything that Joao said, meaning to say, we give a direction and then we say, look, guys, this is the direction you have to take. In Europe, we tend to say, oh, we have big ambitions, but we are putting a lot of hurdles. You can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this. And there, you know, you're left with nothing to achieve your targets. In the US, for instance, what is advanced biofuel? It's not made from out of thin air. It's minimum 50% greenhouse gas emission reduction. That's how an advanced biofuels is defined, you know, in a nutshell. Mm. So that's it. In Europe, we say, oh, the more I
hear what you're
complex.
saying. Yeah, I hear what you're saying about, you know, an overall plan, state continuity.
This is what we need.
But you know that, especially in Europe, policies are shaped by politicians, and political balances play a key role in the whole discussion. Let me go first. We'll get back to that, Valérie. Let me go again to Patrick. To focus more on the agricultural aspect, because farmers in Europe, Patrick, essentially raised their voice a couple of weeks before the European elections, and they managed to bring changes. Not major changes, but at least, you know, something was shaken at the European Commission level. What I'm asking now, what I would like to ask you is, if you see a kind of controversial approach when it comes to the EU protein strategy you mentioned before. Because from one hand, we see that by phasing out first generation biofuels, animal feed production is affected. On the other hand, we see increasing, and correct me if I'm wrong, increasing imports of animal feed from third countries, from Latin America. In this concept, how do we make sure that Europe will have, you know, EU protein production, you know, autonomy? Is it a controversy, or I'm a bit mistaken in this?
Thanks. Thanks for the question. First, well, farmers have started protesting since months. So we say that it started. Well, there's also a discussion when it started, the protest at national levels and what happened. So our view, it's started many months ago because of a certain number of elements, because of an increase of cost, because of bureaucracy, because of the lack of simplification, because of the lack also of security for the future. And this is one of the elements which we need to consider. So long-term security, farmers, they want to go and produce food, produce co-products, contribute to energy independency, and also to support the production of protein. So, but as it was mentioned in discussion, they need a long-term prospect. They need security of policies. So this is one of the elements. Clearly, there was a change of direction in this respect, which was important and welcome, but farmers, as again, need to have a future prospect. They need to have a 10, 15 years direction as any other business activity, as Valérie was mentioning for the activity. So going back to the issue of the protein strategy, it's key because there is a need in this respect to go towards enhancing the strategic autonomy of protein productions. It was actually one of the key topics of the Belgian president, the Belgian informal council, and clearly, and again, as I will say, biofuels and crop-based biofuels can contribute, and actually the figures that presented by ePURE, where the production of proteins was very strong and more than the production of bioethanol, are very evident. And I really support what was mentioned before, the idea of a pact with stakeholders, where you say, okay, we need somehow production coming of co-products and protein coming from crop-based biofuels on this amount, production of energy coming from bioethanol, crop-based in this amount, but I will include also, for example, in the energy contribution of the production from farmers, the production of biogas and other, or for example, why not other source of energy like solar, for example. So this is the mix of energy and the mix of which we need to contribute to reduce the dependency, and including also the reduction of protein. So we are years that we are expecting a protein strategy from the European institutions. Every year had to come. Actually, it was one in the action plans on Farm to Fork. It was really expected, and we are still waiting, unfortunately. And the interesting thing is, every time it seems to be a communication, it seems to be a strategy. Now it should be a document. So we hope that finally we arrive to a moment where, by the end of the year, when the new commission, there will be a concrete protein strategy which has the right mix, also including co-products coming from crop-based biofuels.
Thank you, Patrick. We're talking about an overall plan, bringing together a multi-stakeholder, consultation process as well. I don't understand, and this is a question for everybody. I don't understand why this didn't happen in the last 25 years, 30 years, and it will happen in the next 5 years. I don't understand what makes you all believe that this could be the case in the next 5 years.
Can I give a tentative response?
Definitely, Valérie, go ahead.
By quoting Einstein. Einstein said, if you want, don't expect the same people who created a problem to solve it. So that's why we are saying we are hopeful, because with the new team, maybe there will be a new breath of fresh air, and hope that this kind of plan would take place. I mean, I agree. We don't have certainties and crystal balls. We don't. But if we don't, one thing is sure: if we don't have such a plan, there won't be any investment. Somebody mentioned earlier the aviation and the maritime. That's another example of how we are going to fail, because we are going to fail. I'm sorry to say it. I'm an optimistic, but honestly, I am also a realist person. And, it's not very difficult to see that if there are investments, they will be made probably outside of the EU, because we are not doing it the right way. That's it. So we need a plan. And the plan doesn't include only just setting increasingly ambitious targets with very limited leeway to achieve the target.
Patrick, how do you see?
If I may,
Joao, go ahead, Joao, and I'll go back to Patrick.
If I may, just out of the cuff to answer to your question. I think what we need is a review of the Green Deal as a whole. The Green Deal was driven by a lot of ideology, without proper checks and balances inside the college. My personal opinion.
Let me just make a parenthesis here. It was also green-lighted by the President of the European Commission.
Yes.
In the European People's Party.
Yes.
The fact that
absolutely.
The European People's Party took a step back 1 month before the European elections when it comes to the Green Deal, when it comes to it, doesn't necessarily mean that it didn't take part in the decision making. They were there.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I couldn't agree more. Okay. I'm not excusing anybody, or I'm not joking for anybody in this respect. What I'm saying is that when I look at the flurry of proposals, some of them not well thought of, without impact assessments and so on and so forth, there was a lot of ideology there. The problem with the Green Deal, in my view, is not the objectives. Is how to get there. Is the way to get there. There are alternatives to what has been proposed. Agriculture is one aspect. Decarbonization of transports is another aspect. So what we need, in my view, with a new political reality and Sarantis there was a pause in the Green Deal 6 months ago or so, because the Commission realized, because some member states realized, because some politicians realized that Europe was going down the drain. We were losing. We were shooting our feet for nothing, because it was not having an impact in the world whatsoever. It was having an impact on us, a negative. So I'm not questioning the objectives. I'm questioning is how to get there. So I would hope that this reality would translate, this new realization of the problems of this model that was advanced would result in a reevaluation of the model and checking whether there are not better ways of getting there. That's my point.
Same question for Patrick, and I'll get back to you, Joao, for Patrick and Luke, and I'll get back to you regarding the consistency between the DGs, because we have received from the audience a lot of questions about that. So, Patrick, do you really believe that the next mandate in the European Commission, in the European Parliament, will find a way to come up with a steady long-term plan when it comes to farming and the biofuel sector?
First, one element that we didn't consider that it needs to be put in the picture: the new poly-crisis reality. So we come from COVID, we come from Russian invasion of Ukraine, dramatic, that had to last a few days, and still we are in this situation. And with the increase of energy cost, and also the society which needs to recognize the strategy and recognize actually a strategic role of ensuring energy production in Europe. So we produced as a Copa-Cogeca a manifesto where we say reposition agriculture as strategic asset, but for food security and energy security. So this, I think, has the elements to put into consideration. And agriculture has a key role to play in both and in the discussion which we are having today. My view is that clearly this new reality needs to be considered. There needs to be a consideration of what all the proposals that were made and how to reach these objectives. So this is the main, and also bring back the economics. For a certain period in Europe, we couldn't speak neither of competitiveness. Now it's clear all parts of society, not just agriculture, which was clearly underlining from the beginning the difficulty in putting into place this top-down approach with no funding, no understanding of the consequences, and too quick, basically. So there is the possibility to bring back economics in all sectors, and I think both the decarbonization with the transport sector, we need to take a look in this respect and clearly bring back competitiveness. So how, what was Valérie was saying, how we can keep economics ongoing here in Europe. Agriculture is one part of this. Agriculture has a key role in this picture for strategic food security, but energy security, as I was saying. So my hope is that, again, if I speak for my sector, which is interlinked in the energy in this respect, we need to reposition this sector as agriculture, but also the crop-based biofuels as strategic for Europe and also energy independency.
Before I go to Luke, Patrick, how are you going to convince NGOs, civil society organizations that insist on the food versus fuel argument, despite scientific evidence that Valérie mentioned before, surveys conducted commissioned by the European Commission, etc., etc. How are you going to sit around the same table with these people that insist on this food versus fuel argument? And how are you going to come up with a multi-stakeholder long-term plan? I still don't see that in practice happening.
I agree it's a challenging, but to give you an example, we are now engaged as agriculture sector in a strategic dialogue on the future of agriculture, which we are in a process with a certain number of actors which are sitting on the table. And it's clearly, it's complicated, but that is the direction, because we can't live anymore in a polarization between farming, energy, food, crops. This crops for energy. this it's not the way to go. We need to restart a new pact with society, which again brings economic and the centrality of agriculture in all its aspects. So it's a complicated task, but we need to, this is the direction. There will need to be trade-offs and political choices. So these are the aspects. But it's important that any choice, not as the last years, where there was targets and how to implemented with a top-down approach. We need to bring back a dialogue, if possible. I hope it's possible. Here we are, economic operators, which look to the future. We need collectively institutions, organization, economic sectors, and also other parts of society, NGOs, to look to the future also from the economic side.
Valérie, do you agree with this? Do you believe that it's still feasible to bring on?
Absolutely. And I think, there's no other way to go. And honestly, it's a win-win for everyone. If we succeed along this line of a collective and a dialogue with all together, I mean, it's a win-win for everyone, because if we don't, then just look at what happens. If we don't decarbonize transport is not going to vanish. People are going to continue using their cars using fossil oil. Punto. So either we decarbonize or we don't. So we all want to achieve our targets. This, as Joao said, nobody questions the ambition. I am a citizen of this planet. I want to decarbonize. I want us to succeed. But the way we are doing it is not functioning. Over the last 20 years of biofuels policy, we could have done so much more. And so it's time now that we change the way we function to hopefully change the way we succeed. Yeah.
Look, the rest of the speakers basically say here that the Green Deal's ultimate objectives are correct. The means are not. Do you share the same opinion? Because you have the overall picture, look of the situation. It's for Luke. Sorry, Pagani.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I think the Green Deal started with very good targets that you say, well, we want to decarbonize by 2050. I think that is shared also by other regions in the world. So you shouldn't do it on your own. I think this needs to be streamlined also with other regions. Then the matter of how you do it is of course sometimes debatable on where you pinpoint things. And what is really important, and that's what we also realize, is that everything starts to be connected. Certainly, if you start from agriculture, forestry is also, so climate, energy production, food production, nature, biodiversity, everything is connected, and also the bioeconomy, which hasn't been brought up yet, but there's also products, fossil products that we need to replace, and the bioeconomy plays a big role there. So everything needs to be interlinked, and so far what we have seen sometimes in policymakers is that these policy domains work in silos, say that, well, our domain is most important, so we don't compromise in this. It needs to go together, all of that, and I think it would be very strong if you can get to a dialogue where people go away from their unnuanced positions. Because it's also, I think it's the time spirit at the moment is also problematic in that sense that there's so much unnuanced and left, right and white, black discussions. I think we need to go back to a place where we can talk to each other, and also realize people's positions. What are the pros and cons? How can we match things? That is extremely important, I think, in the future. Otherwise, you're indeed blocking solutions by saying, well, there's a lot of discussions we have in IEA Bioenergy with people in the field and with NGOs on can you actually still harvest things from forest, and some say, well, you should stay away from forest. So all these discussions, bringing back to reality, bringing them back away from the sentiment, which is drawing a lot of the discussions at the moment. And getting into the facts and look at how can you actually make things complementary that are built on each other. But it's not easy, let me say.
Yeah, before I go to Joao to ask this DG's thing, because you kind of mentioned this interconnection between several fields, which is not the case in the case of the EU institutions. I would like to focus on this sentiment-based discussion that we have in Europe from time to time. Do you see that, because you have the panoramic picture of the situation, the global picture, do you see similar conversations taking place in India, in Brazil, or in the US? Do they have this, or it's pure a scientific approach, and that's it?
Sarantis, I was the EU ambassador to Brazil for 5 years. You might recall that as well. In Brazil, it was a policy that was initially put forward by the military regime. But when I was there, Lula was the president. And I remember once I went to his office, and the thing that he showed me was small pots with the seeds that could be used to produce biofuels in his office.
Yeah.
So not in the meeting room, in his personal office. So it was made by the military regime, but Lula, absolutely the opposite of the military regime, pursued the policy. So there is no discussion at all. In the United States, it's also seen as something that contributes to their national security and to farmers. There is more of a discussion because there is a sector that doesn't like the benefits that accrue to the biofuel sector, and they would rather prefer a competition on the same grounds between biofuels and oil. But it's a policy that is very well entrenched. And what I notice is that in other countries, for instance, India, they are developing the sector because they see the benefits. And we are lagging behind, as most speakers here have said today. I'm sad.
Maybe I can come back also to the original question. Indeed, there's less discussion, but there is discussion, and there's also realization by the policymakers that it has to be in a sustainable way. So in Brazil, you have the what they call the Renova Bio program to support biofuels with certain conditions, with also calculations on greenhouse gas emissions. And the rewarding of the biofuels in terms of they get certificates in terms of the amount of greenhouse gas emissions saved. And it's also a policy in the United States, particularly California, where they have this low carbon fuel standard, which is also based on how much greenhouse gas do you save with the biofuels, and that's the reward that you get. So that's the certificates that you get. I think that's a really good trend also to look at. Yeah, how well are they performing, and the better that they perform, the more that they get a reward, and that's realized in all the sectors. And coming to India, I think indeed the benefits there are extreme, are very high. So they have, and then it's not just about crop-based biofuels, but also about using residues. There's so many straw residues which are burned in certain areas, which are really destroying the air quality there. So it really has a lot of other benefits as well next to energy security. So they really see the value of investing in that. I think that's also important. Yeah, so there's discussions everywhere. There's also NGOs and critical voices in the United States.
I guess that these conversations, I understand these conversations in other member states, these discussions do not block a whole process, do not create, biased approaches in specific policy making.
No, they want to go further in a constructive way to making sure that all the biofuels developments are happening in a sustainable way with high greenhouse gas savings and not having big implications on biodiversity.
Valérie wanted to say something?
No, I just wanted to recall that the G7 meetings twice, so this year and last year, twice they mentioned, and they specifically mentioned the role of biofuels, sustainable biofuels, to achieve our collective.
Yes, but Valérie, the European Union signed this.
No, I mean, yeah, there was France, there's Germany, there's Italy, there's Canada, there's the US. Who else am I missing? So the EU is not a member of the G7, as far as I know.
No,
but,
I mean, they endorsed it. Big member states endorsed it. But you know, the country level, I mean, the member states impact, the member states will is not reflected on an EU level.
Mm.
I mean, I don't see Germany putting pressure on EU institutions when it comes to first generation biofuels. I don't see France doing the same. So, you know, it's not only the EU policymakers, the Brussels-based policymakers, it's also the member states themselves. So I don't know what you see there.
a lot of conflicting thoughts and, you know, discrepancies and, you know, yeah, I agree with you. I mean, sometimes even at the Commission level, they draft a report, they say, oh, there's this, they make a conclusion, and yet they continue acting in a way which is completely opposite as what the report has concluded. I'm talking first generation biofuels and the fact that there is no recognized impact on 1G biofuels on food security and food prices, and yet the situation or the position of the Commission is very critical about on 1G biofuels. You see, it's all very not logical in my opinion, and so yeah.
Joao, finally, the question on you know, the different DGs. Several participants sent more or less the same question. One of them says that biofuels legislation in the EU is spread among different pieces of legislation on energy, industry, etc., etc. Therefore, different DGs coordinate this in the European Commission. I guess you see that there is a kind of lack of efficiency there, but is it feasible? Is it practically feasible for the biofuel policy to be united under one DG? Is it practically possible?
Sorry, the question is for me, Sarantis. Oh yeah. Sorry, I didn't.
Yeah.
Well,
three questions, more or less the same content, particularly for you.
Okay. No, I don't think the Commission works like that. I think there is what we call the chef de file, okay? Could be DG Energy, but they have to work very closely with, of course, environment, climate, agriculture, and perhaps other DGs. The problem I see, or the problem I've seen, is that for instance, a DG that should have a keen interest in developing biofuels, I'm thinking about agriculture, they have been a bit too silent, in my view, for a number of factors. Because as a DG, they have lost power internally, in particular because they have a commissioner that belongs to a political group that was not on the top, and perhaps his own views are a bit, I would say, again, personal opinion, a bit turned backwards rather than to the future. So there are a number of circumstances that have led to the fact that the policy was driven by DG Energy, climate and environment. So I would say a bit unbalanced. And again, I agree that we have to have dialogue. We have good facts. I would welcome to debate facts with everybody, all the NGOs, but we have to have a politically driven push to sit people down and say, look, we need to do something that helps decarbonization, that helps our economy, that doesn't hurt the pockets of people, and of course, good for the climate and environment. It's simplicity in decarbonization. And let's come with the best solutions. And you know, on basis of facts, I'm pretty convinced that we have very good arguments. For instance, the food versus fuel debate, Sarantis. Many years ago, I could imagine, when did it pop up? Do you recall? It popped up when there was the big crisis, and there was on the news that people in Mexico and Central America were getting hungry because they couldn't afford to buy maize, one of their staples, right? It started there. What is the situation now? We have plenty of maize. We have the Eastern European part of Europe afraid of the competition from Ukraine. And more importantly, those producing, for instance, bioethanol, and Valérie knows that much better than I do, in terms of value, they produce more food, those biorefineries, than fuel. So all that is an outdated debate. So when we look at the facts, let's sit everybody around the table and let's move on.
You want to say something, Patrick?
Yes, Sarantis, just to follow up on the interesting comments by Joao on the structures, on and how to ensure coherence of the EU policy. Well, we have been calling for a vice president for a commissioner for agriculture and rural areas with a role as vice president. And so this is the objective, to ensure coherence to all the policies that have an impact on farming and agriculture, and to ensure so that the full transformative potential of farming sector could put in place. So clearly the part also on biofuels and the contribution to the debate would come from the side agriculture and rural areas. So also, because I think, and it's important, I stressed it at the beginning, but to keep it, to bring it back. So crop-based biofuels have also a value for economics, rural areas, the employment, the areas which are sometimes in the most remote or complicated to enhance economic activity. So this is one of the elements that we need to consider. And in our view, having a vice president in charge for agriculture and rural areas could also contribute to ensure coherence in this potential, the full potential of crop-based biofuels policies.
That was a concrete proposal, Patrick. But the food versus fuel discussion is still there. But how about ILUC? Is it still under discussion in Europe?
No, I mean, it's still under the discussion for whoever wants to discuss it. But the Commission has clarified the situation in its latest document, which is called the Acte Délégué, Delegated Act, where the Commission confirmed that this indirect land use change phenomenon is no issue. At least the risk of driving indirect land use change for EU crop-based biofuels is very small, almost negligible. And they have identified a couple of crops, mostly palm oil, which is of high risk of driving deforestation. So this debate, I'm not saying it's closed, but it's been clarified. And so we know that when we produce ethanol from European sugar beets, for instance, we have actually zero risk of driving indirect land use change, because that's the level of sugar beet in the Delegated Act, zero. And negligible for cereals-based ethanol. So yeah. It's we have science again.
Yeah.
We have science.
I wouldn't say there's no discussion anymore on it, but
no, there is discussion, but
but
we can
I
discuss
think
forever.
what I liked about what the Commission there did is really looking at what happened in the 10 years from 2008, what has been the expansion of crops which are related with biofuels, and they identified, there's issues with palm oil, with their expansion into high carbon stock land, but it's much less the case for others. And while soy it's a little bit problematic, but everything which is grown here in Europe, they didn't qualify much as a high ILUC risk. I do have to warn because there is discussions on how can you qualify a high ILUC risk crop as a low ILUC risk. So what kind of how can you grow things, palm oil for instance, with an low ILUC approach? It's dangerous for policy makers that they say, well, this kind of approach we also have to apply to other crops, so that it's only on abandoned areas or in just the yield increases that you have compared to a reference situation. So I've been to a webinar on this also, and it is destined for palm oil and high ILUC risk crops. But there is a danger that policymakers will say, well, we have to apply it to all the crops that are used for biofuels. So it's something we have to be really careful with. But as Valérie mentioned, I think it's good that they made this analysis looking at what has actually happened on the market compared to ILUC modeling, which goes in all kinds of directions. That you try to model the world, and the world doesn't really work like that.
So basically, you're saying that you fear that EU policymakers are putting all biofuels, first generation biofuels, in the same box.
Mm-hmm.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have 7 minutes left, almost 8. I would like you to have a closing statement, and regarding the expectations you have from the next, not only European Commission but also the European Parliament. You all admitted that the European Parliament played a role in the policy making when it comes to biofuels. What are your expectations based on the fact that highly likely, based on the judging from the projections, we will have different political balances? What are your expectations? Let me start with Patrick and the farmer's perspective.
Definitely, we need to take a look again to the coherence of the policy impacting biofuels and crop-based biofuels. So we need to clearly, energy has a strategic role in Europe, and we need also to consider the role of crop-based biofuels. So how do we do it? We need to do it in a coherent way and review, if needed, the legislation which impact the sector. So this is what we expect to have, but once decided, to really keep a long-term perspective, which allows investment, stability for farmers, and investment for economic operators.
Joao?
Sorry, sometimes my connection is not so good. Well, I fully agree with what Patrick said, so I'm not going to repeat. My expectations are that this pause button that was pressed a few months ago becomes a review button, not necessarily a review on the objectives of the Green Deal, but a review on how to get there. I would expect that review to be made in a way as to use facts as to guarantee our interests in terms of not only sovereignty, but our economic interests, as well as the fight against climate change and the preservation of the environment, that there will be the right balance there. I would hope that would be part of the review, and that review could bring all the actors together and draft a way forward that would give stability for the sector for the next decade or more to come.
Thank you, Joao. Luke, and then we close with Valérie.
Okay, I'm not going to comment on political balances. I don't think that's my role here. But I agree. You have to look at the different aspects, which everything is interconnected: nature, climate, agriculture, energy. So that it's important that you take this step and look at and bring people together and consider that. And for the other side, which I mentioned in the beginning, also looking at the transport decarbonization, taking a step back on how can we achieve that? So what is really realistic? What can we expect from electric vehicles? I think maybe there's a little bit of stumbling there, but which is quite likely if you introduce something. But there is an important role. But how can we get to certain points in 2050 in the different steps that we also need, and what role for which biofuels, advanced biofuels, crop-based biofuels. Although as mentioned, I don't like this distinction between first generation, second generation. They should be considered in terms of their merits as greenhouse gas savings. Yeah. So that's
Can I ask you something? By 2050, it's more based on your estimations and the scientific surveys you have conducted all these years. My question is, if by 2050 Europe sticks to the plan, it's a hypothesis, right? Sticks to the phase-out plan of first generation biofuels, and advanced biofuels are not scaled up. And do you expect that electrification of road transport will be sped up in Europe and will cover the transport needs? Or you fear that we may end up relying on oil again at some point, because biofuels will be out of the market and electric cars will not be on the road?
Yeah, in 2050, I can refer to what the IEA has analyzed, and the expectation is that road transport, and particularly passenger cars, so the light duty, is going to be electric in 2050. But if you look at the transport overall, there's quite some demand from aviation, maritime, still some from heavy duty for liquid fuels, and that's something that has to come from renewable fuels preferably, and according to the IEA, that's going to be a mix of biofuels and e-fuels.
Thank you, Luc. Valérie, your expectations?
Oh God, yeah. I would just would like to conclude that for me, biofuel is such a fantastic sector, because the production of biofuels and the consumption of biofuel touches upon a number of major strategic issues. We're talking here energy, we're talking climate, we're talking food, agriculture, industry. And the social aspect, we didn't develop too much this aspect, but there won't be anything without the support of citizens. So I remember Joao mentioned that the fact that it has to be accessible economically for people. So it's fascinating, and it's extremely complex, because there are so many different aspects that are intertwined that, I personally would call this new Commission and new Parliament call them for an awareness of the urgent need for such a plan that we described today. We need to have a plan that takes into account all these different aspects. We didn't mention either the trade policy, but there's no point in developing a fantastic system in Europe if we don't have a decent or an acceptable and coherent, again, coherency is key, but trade policy. Especially when you have major countries like US and Brazil, who have 40-50 years advanced, not to mention China. But so, we are lagging behind. We have to take that into account. So we can't continue blindfolded, so to speak. We need to stop. This method doesn't work. So been there, done them. Now we have to stop, calm down, group together, and maybe it's a call also for the Commission, because I agree with Joao. It should be the Commission taking the lead. It should be the Commission taking the initiative to, push this consultative working group, so to speak, involving all the different DJs. That's how they did in the US. Don't think that in the US things happen magically like this. They also had their bad times back then. That was a long time ago, but I had a chance to be informed of what happened, a couple of decades ago. So yeah, the Commission should take the lead. But one thing is sure, we can't continue like this. We are all going to lose if we don't change the method.
So I hope your voices will be heard from the next mandate, both the European Parliament and the European Commission. I really hope that it's going to be a constructive conversation, at least on an institutional level, because politically, I assume things will be more complicated. However, thank you for participating in this conversation. Very interesting input, very interesting standpoints. I would like also to thank the audience and the participants online who shared with us their interesting questions. I wish you a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.